Hello and welcome to Classeek 15. I'm Michael Beek. My guest this week is violinist Charlie Siem. Born in London, he first picked up the violin at the tender age of 3. His studies at Eton, Cambridge and the Royal College of Music led him to early public exposure, and he is today one of the UK's foremost violinists, performing and recording a wide range of repertoire. Charlie, thanks so much for joining us on the Classeek 15 podcast.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. Thank you.
And we're going to have a chat about staying positive as a musician and an artist on a difficult journey. I mean, would you say you're still on a journey as a musician? Because, you know, you're a good decade or so into your sort of public-facing career now. Are you still on a journey?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's just like life in the sense that, like, you never sort of stop learning, you never stop being challenged. And it has to be a sort of constant sense of, progress or being on some sort of a journey to stay stimulated and inspired, or else I think one doesn't have much to say.
True. And what are the sorts of things that can make that journey difficult for a musician? I mean, if you think back maybe to the earlier years as you were sort of trying to make it, let's say, what were the things that were particularly challenging for you?
Well, I think, certainly my experience has been, one goes through different phases, of being challenged by different things. Obviously, starting out, it's really kind of getting the ball rolling, and it's a question of just getting the opportunities to go on stage, starting to kind of, establish a name that sort of encourage invitations to sort of get that journey started, basically. Because I think, once you're able to have concerts and engagements or, recordings, whatever it might be, then you start the learning process more than anything else. And so it's getting that going, which initially, from my perspective, was very sort of, now I look back on it, I said yes to everything. I was very kind of open-minded, I suppose, and in many ways sort of non-judgmental about opportunities to play and perform, just to literally get things going. I wasn't that prescriptive. And I suppose I could, if I was to go back to my younger self, I'd maybe say, have a clearer idea of exactly what you want to do and aim for that. But ultimately, I think it doesn't matter, because as I was saying before, the journey itself, the process of kind of self-discovery through different challenges, which can be in the form of, of course, the challenge of playing the instrument, of developing your sense of expression, interpretation, and refining that, and that process never sort of ends. But two, also the challenges of how people respond to you and how people perceive you and how you manage yourself within that. So many different sorts of challenges that one encounters, on this sort of career. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. I think one has to just get going, and again, being challenged one way or another is how you sort of sharpen your blade, and how you learn more about what it is that you want to do and how to do it.
Yeah. And what about the knocks when you're young? What sorts of things were disappointing? Was it sort of not getting the concert date you wanted? What was it? What sorts of things were disappointing?
Yeah, I mean, so many things. I mean, I'm sure lots of musicians would sort of agree. From the very beginning, it's such a, one has to be obviously self-critical to be able to kind of improve, but you have to you have to be constantly accepting and open to being criticised, whether it's when you're studying, you're in master classes or doing competitions, whatever it might be. You're constantly, to a certain extent, being pulled apart and kind of rejected. So I think you learn how to kind of process that from a young age. I think if you're an instrumentalist, and I think, from the sort of professional standpoint, that definitely carries on. I mean, you're constantly, whether you're playing to conductors and being, refused a concert, whatever it might be, or if your management at one point is trying to aim to get you in a certain place, and then you don't make it. There are so many different choices people have when it comes to artists, and then obviously you get reviews. People writing reviews that can be negative. I mean, so there's so much that you can get distracted by when it comes to knocks and psychological, and it's all psychological ultimately, psychological kind of blows. But that's where, coming back to the kind of fundamentals and the kind of the essence of why you're doing what you're doing, and realizing that there's no sort of ultimate kind of realization of perfection. Again, this is my interpretation. Maybe it's conditioned by my experience. I mean, for some people, maybe that's it. You're aiming for just having, kind of achieved a level where you're beyond any problems and challenges. But for me, it's, it is one step at a time, and actually being able to challenge myself at something that I've spent my life investing in. And that's the privilege in itself. And there's definitely ups and downs and moments when people are more positive or less positive to, you know, how you're playing or what you're doing, whatever it might be. But it's the privilege of doing what it is you set out to do that makes it possible to take one step after another.
Yeah. And I can't imagine it gets any easier, particularly the more established you get.
Certain things get, I think, as for me anyway, as I've got older and I've sort of start to mature more, there's a kind of, not detachment, but maybe unattachment from what I'm doing that allows me to kind of relax more about what I'm doing. I think like when I first started out, I was so, every note, I had such a sense of expectation and a pressure upon myself to deliver in a certain way that it was almost stifling, you know. You're kind of being choked by that sort of, that sense of expectation, self-expectation. I feel now, I don't know, it's also maybe post-COVID and, you know, not having a manager at the moment, so I have far fewer performances than I had before. I'm so much more grateful for everything every opportunity that I have, that I really just want to enjoy it. And I'm not as sort of self-critical as I might once have been, whatever problem it is that, you know, you might have.
And obviously you sort of emerged into the public sort of field at a young age. And tell me a little bit about that, and tell me a little bit about how you were able to sort of take control of your own sort of destiny in many ways. Because when you're in a public face, and is there a sense of expectation of the sort of musician you are at that point already? And do you feel like you had to sort of prove yourself in any way?
I mean, I think I always feel to a certain extent, you know, every time you have a concert, there'll be people who have never heard you before and might have no sort of idea of where you've come from, or they might have a real idea. And so there'll always be that sense of having to prove yourself and, you know, kind of, you know, give yourself, shine as best as you can in each moment. But I think it's not the way I necessarily think about it. And the way my career has developed in many ways has not been exactly what I've necessarily aimed for, but what I've learned is that you can never control how people perceive you, and you can never necessarily scientifically sort of mold your career in a particular way. Certainly, I haven't been able to, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a very internal and personal journey when it comes to, for me, playing the violin and you know, interpreting the music that I do, and that's really all it's about. Anything outside of that is kind of beyond my control, and actually not necessarily worth spending too much energy on trying to kind of engineer or manipulate in any way.
And tell me about, we talked about sort of stresses in the journey to becoming an established artist, but what about when you are established, and what are the stresses, let's say, of maintaining a career? What are you thinking about at this stage that you think, oh God, I need to focus on that, or maybe this isn't working yet? Or
yeah, well, I mean, for me, I'm in an interesting place now actually, because I'm kind of almost sort of starting again now. Like since COVID came and obviously everything came to an end, I then dismissed the manager that I had at the time and haven't replaced her over now, you know, a long period of time. So I don't have anyone even sort of working for me to sort of, you know, getting dates for me. And I'm really kind of slightly sort of self-reflective space, you know, thinking about where it is I want to go next and who I want to kind of work with to establish the next phase of my career. So yeah, the idea of being established and maintain your career, I'm really in a kind of strange lull at the moment. And I think it's a wonderful place to be. Like I've had a lot of time to kind of practice, study, you know, kind of expand my repertoire, and again, yeah, be slightly distanced from the sort of day-to-day kind of stress of moving around and playing and, you know, performing, and to really sort of think, how can I do it more effectively? How can I find something to say that, you know, has relevance to me and so, you know, to the audience, and so yeah, I think that's it. The idea of being established is never sort of certain, and you always have to address how you're going to sort of, again, for me, it's really like my next phase is how I'm going to kind of re-establish myself.
But kind of exciting in that there's a freedom there, I suppose, in which you can sort of just
do. I mean, I've got all possibilities open to me now, and that's why I'm not necessarily rushing into anything, as I always did before. My sort of first part of my career, I would never want to be in a position where I didn't have a number of engagements, in the next year, or not have a manager, not have somebody, gunning away for me. That would be a terrifying prospect. Whereas that seems to have changed since the COVID experience, where it was sort of forced upon me. And I realised actually I was kind of in a perpetual sort of treadmill, not always really thinking deeply about everything I was doing and valuing every chance I had to go on stage and really kind of cherishing that experience. And so in turn creating something, extremely special as far as my experience goes. And so now, I think this is a really exciting time for me anyway, because my perspective has a sort of more kind of profound kind of gratitude for being able to play the violin, but having the possibility of the next phase of my career and wanting to do it in a way that has as much meaning and kind of fulfillment as possible.
And what would you say has been the biggest learning curve for you in this journey so far?
Biggest learning curve, I think, is the idea of the process and the kind of idea of constantly refining yourself and your ability to express the music that you're playing over achieving something that's kind of finished, achieving something that is polished to perfection, in every sense, whether it's the shape of your career, whether it's the performance that you're giving, your interpretation. Everything is somehow a learning process. And ultimately, the learning process is more than just the music and getting as good as you can at interpreting the music and having a career, big enough and sort of established enough to sort of give you a wide audience. But it's really just your individual journey through life and, exactly, learning and expanding as a human being through this process of, using music almost as a tool to access something deeper within yourself and your experience of life. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off what you expect of yourself and each performance and how you want your career to look, because it's not necessarily the focus. It's the great sort of privilege of having something to do to take you on this journey that hopefully will sort of unravel your identity and your possibility, and hopefully your ever-expanding possibility along the way.
So it's not about being so focused on the end result, it's about sort of taking that journey and learning from each of those moments.
Yeah, the kind of Buddhist philosophy, I guess, of just literally it's the journey, not the destination. I think that's... I guess somebody could have told me that earlier on, but I would have understood it intellectually. But I think through the experience of my career and what I've been going through, I really feel it now and really value that philosophy.
Were you given any sort of really sage advice by anyone in particular on your journey? Was there anything you could pass on to somebody now who was asking for a bit of guidance?
I mean, I've got one bit of advice that was given to me by one of my teachers, Shlomo Mintz, which was just never look around you, never look at other people, never look at what other people are doing or what's happening around. Just focus on yourself and where you're going and what you're doing. And I mean, obviously, when it comes to learning and trying to find inspiration, that's a different thing. And of course, we are communal animals and we need each other. We need an outside stimulation, to grow. But when it comes to sort of understanding your place in your context, don't look around you. You are your kind of reality, and there's nothing beyond that. And it can be very distracting, to look at other people and what they're doing and kind of comparing yourself, to your surroundings. I always thought that was a really good bit of advice, which I've reminded myself of along my journey so far. But I'm sure I've been given other good bits of advice, but that's the one that jumps out to me now.
It is good advice, though, isn't it? Because we do tend to look beyond ourselves, sort of almost all the time.
No, exactly, and I think you can't help it. And obviously, we all have ideas of where we'd like to be and where we wouldn't like to be, and and then there are people that kind of characterize that around us, and we somehow fit ourselves in between all these various things. And actually, there's really nothing beyond you and your experience, because you can never understand what goes on with anybody else and what their journey might actually be. And even the way you see it is not going to be true or accurate to what it actually is anyway. So more often, yeah, exactly. We all interpret from very subjective perspectives. There's no kind of real solid kind of objectivity from anyone's point of view. So I think that it's important on many kind of levels, that idea of really just following your path and being inspired and being kind of drawing as much kind of information and stimulation from around you, but then channeling that into your path wherever that might be going.
Absolutely. Well, it's great advice, and I'm sure many a young musician will find that really useful. So thank you, Charlie, for imparting that and giving us your time today. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's all from this edition of Classeek 15. Our podcasts are available on all platforms and on our website, www.classeek.com, where you can also find Classeek's online concert series and other media on demand. And don't forget to check us out on social media too, @Classeek Music. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.